usually stands on its own, but often
even like
entry point it doesn't hurt.
Yeah. And how are things in town? We had a good rehearsal today. What did you off the record? And then we have all these microphones.
All right, here we are. Welcome, everybody. My pleasure to welcome you to another, well, it doesn't look like anybody's eating lunch, but talk with the composers in that case. I thought I'd kick it off really by, I don't know if it's true for every composer that seems like the hardest thing must be facing a blank page of paper and figuring out what will be your inspiration and what will kick it off. I mean, just like being a writer, you know, to get the great idea for a book. Maybe we could just start at the end. You could introduce each of yourselves, maybe give a little bit of your background and tell our listeners, you know, what your process is, how you get started on a new piece.
First. My name is Zosha Dicastri. It's my first time here at the festival. I'm very excited to be here. I'm originally from Alberta in Canada, and then I moved when I was 17 to Montreal for studies at McGill. I studied piano performance and composition, and I'm now doing graduate studies at Columbia University in New York. So that's where I've come from.
How do you start writing a piece? I mean, what happens? Is it just in your head?
I try to run away from the blank page. That's usually what happens first. For each piece, it's quite different. Usually, I start with some sketches in a notebook. For this piece, I woke up in the middle of the night and wrote a whole sketch for the piece in orange highlighter, which then I couldn't read the next morning. But sometimes it happens.
Well, that explains it, huh? No, just kidding, just kidding.
So there's usually sketches, and then also I like working directly with sound. So I work with the computer a fair amount, playing with different sound samples. I improvise at the piano. I'll record myself singing, which I'll never play for anybody else, but it helps me get my ideas out. And then eventually it starts to take form in the notated score.
Great. Chaiyu?
So my name is Chaiyu, and I was born and raised in Taiwan and came to the States in '96. And this is my third time to be here, and it always felt great to be here, like home to me. And so usually I like to get all kinds of inspirations for my piece from literature or image paintings or even mathematical sequence. And sometimes I do work on from motivic elements, and I like to work on the overall structures first, and then build from smaller pieces and try to work on that. So.
Mason, I hope you all heard Mason's piece last night. It was beautiful.
Well, I'm a pianist. There are probably a lot of composers who started the piano. When I was first beginning as a composer when I was younger, I often would really do a lot of thinking with my fingers. And I think that's a great way to write. You know, your body is kind of a vessel, and your instrument is very much a part of the music that you write. But I guess I started to realize that I could paint myself into some corners, and I wanted to get ahead of my fingers. And so now when I'm writing a piece, I'm starting a piece, I really try to think about what it's about. The piece last night obviously had sort of an explicit story about combining the kind of expanse of the desert with a helicopter perspective. But also the other pieces that have been done here. Liquid Interface was a water symphony that gets hotter in each movement, beginning with glaciers. A piece I'm writing for the Chicago Symphony called Alternative Energy is kind of like an energy symphony that has 4 movements, each separated by 100 years. That kind of approach then allows me to think about the kind of material that's going to bring it to life the best way. And it was very hard at first because, you know, as a composer, you love melodies, you love harmonies, you love rhythms, and you love specific musical things. I just found that when I had a framework about, a bigger framework into which the piece was going to fit, it allowed me to search for material a lot more than just kind of being guided by my 10 fingers. So it often starts away from that blank page, and usually stumbling around somewhere in the woods or whatever. I mean, it sounds a little bit cliche, but really just getting away from the instrument and thinking about what is this piece going to be about.
Mm. And Margaret, you heard her piece also, which opened our program last night.
Well, you know, I'm Margaret Brower, and I divide my time between Cleveland, Ohio, and New York. I taught at the Cleveland Institute of Music until 3 years ago, and now I'm just writing music. And let's see, you know, I have a terrible time starting a piece. I usually rewrite the beginning quite a few times. And unlike many composers, if I have some kind of a programmatic idea or a non-musical idea, it seems to take me even longer to write a piece. I have trouble coming up with being restricted to a musical idea that should be like thus and such. So I like to just fool around with musical ideas at first, and sometimes I do. I'm not a pianist, but sometimes I do play around at the piano a little bit to get ideas. I find, you know, walking along the beach of Lake Erie or through the woods or something, when I go back I get better ideas than if I was busy working at my desk before. An example, though, of when I did it, every now and then you have to take a musical idea, and I wrote a viola concerto for the Dallas Symphony last year where the violist just begged me to use quotes from Ubi Caritas, which is a Gregorian chant, and I do actually like to use quotes from older music. So, but making that work was took a long time, trying to find a way to work that in, and I ended up rewriting like the first 15 minutes of music, or maybe the first 10 minutes of music, completely rewriting it after I was into it. So.
And Behzad, you'll hear his piece tonight, his piano concerto with Jean-Yves playing tonight.
Well, thank you. That was such a good question, Marin. You opened up the Pandora box, allowing composers to reveal how challenging is to start a new piece, start from scratch, really, look at a blank piece of paper for hours and days and weeks and months sometimes, and try to come up with a vision, try to create something that never existed before. And unlike poetry or painting that you could show maybe a part of the poem to someone and say, what do you think of it? Or painting that you could get some feedback, music would not make any sense until it's completed. So you're all alone in this process. And you better have a good companion or spouse to tolerate your ups and downs in this process. Let me just go back to introduce myself. I was born in Iran and came to US in 1974 to continue my studies. And this is our first time collaborating. It has been such a joy to work with Marin. And, but going back to the whole process is, I'm not a pianist like Margaret. I only could imagine the sound. I mean, for orchestra piece, you just have to trust your instincts, the instrument that you hear, the violin, the flute, the tuba, and try to imagine a sound world. To me, that's the thrill of composing. And imagining the whole orchestra, and you could edit it in your mind. You say, okay, I'm going to have this passage, and you go through it in your mind in real time, and you change some notes. It's all in the head. And to me, that's the greatest thrill and the greatest challenge as well. once the piece is finished, that excitement dies out, for me at least, until the music is performed for the first time. That moment of encounter, that all along you have heard the piece in your head, and then the moment that the orchestra plays it, and that moment of encounter is probably closest in my mind to a woman who is pregnant with a child for 9 months and imagining what that child looks like. And that moment that the child is born, you say, wow, that's my child. So again, I have 2 children. I've noticed how my wife goes through. So probably that's the closest that I could come up in terms of an analogy of how this creative process works for me.
Okay. You know, a whole other question can be, well, does the child look like what you expected it to look like? But we can ask that later. Let's just, and welcoming back Elena and her pieces tonight on the program.
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly grateful to be invited back. Thank you, Marin. And it's amazing. The orchestra is amazing. You're amazing. And I'm sure I'm repeating everybody else. So you're probably tired
No,
of
I don't
hearing
mind.
this.
It's good.
Okay. So I keep going. It's interesting because I do see my pieces as children, but they grow. So I keep changing them I always think while I'm alive as a composer, I can keep changing the pieces. But let's go back, and I would like to say just a few words about myself. I come from Russia. I was born in Tashkent, but left the city when I was 4. I had studies in Moscow, and we left with my family to go to Australia to immigrate, and I live in Sydney now. So I am very sad to leave tomorrow. So it's really hard for me to say goodbye to this wonderful place, amazing people. I'm one of these composers who gets more inspired by a postcard of a landscape than the landscape itself. I don't particularly get inspired by the trees. I love to be in the room and in the city. So the city, the busy, bustling urban life, funnily enough, inspires me really more. I'm also very happy to work with dance forms and with ballet, with theater. I've spent many years in that genre, so that's something that helps me write. I love reflecting the programmatic, strangely enough. I also work, like some composers, at the piano because I find the fingers are faster than the brain. And they move sometimes in the wrong places, and those wrong things, mistakes, sometimes the best thing that happens. And you can't predict that. The brain can't do that for you. They can't make mistakes, really. Well, it does, of course, but you only know afterwards. So the one thing is fantastic here is that when I go away from here, I've heard so much wonderful playing that I say, next time I should use more of the harp because it's so amazing, and an amazing player here, Nuik, brilliant. Or I hear this wonderful trombonist, Ava, so I think, I can write this amazing something for the trombone next time, you know? Or, so I actually love to write for people which I imagine in my head, so it's very physical. So I try not to be abstract, so I actually imagine a person, and that helps me write.
And I'm happy to welcome back Michael Dougherty. How many times is this now? I don't know. Is it 8?
I've lost track now.
Lost track. That's scary. Okay.
Michael Dougherty, the oldest of 5 Irish boys from Iowa. We all play music. My father was a dance band drummer. Our neighbors hated us because, if you can imagine 5 boys all playing instruments simultaneously in a house, with the houses being close by. Yeah, so for me to become inspired, I do a road trip, and I like to get in my car. I drive to either the thing I'm writing about, if it's a place, or if it's a person, I like to meet that person. Like for G's Bend, the piece will be played next Saturday. I went to Alabama to G's Bend, met the quilters in G's Bend. So I like to do a road trip. I collect all sorts of knickknacks, like old postcards and matchbooks from the 50s and 60s. Which inspired the piece Fever, which will be played on Saturday, the piece I wrote for Marin, a homage to Las Vegas back in the 50s. So, so that's the first step, and then the next step is I have to go to my studio in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I live, and I have a piano there and computer set up, and I improvise and so forth, but I also work with players. I have instrumentalists come to my house on a daily basis, and I write ideas and they play them. And so I like to work with players too. And then the final step is once you hear the piece, then of course there's, you know, you hear it for the first time, and then you have to make some changes, you know, because, so there's 3 different steps. And, but I enjoy composing music, and I'm really glad to be here again. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And it's my pleasure to welcome Shuko Mizuno from Tokyo. We're playing his piece this evening, and this is the first time I've met him here, but I listened to several CDs of his music when I was in Tokyo about 1.5 years ago. You know, people hear that I like new music, and then they take me hostage and play new music for me from their country until I say, oh, okay, I like that one. But I really was attracted to this piece, which is a tone poem that we're playing this evening. It's the harmonies are extraordinarily lush, but also I haven't said this out loud except to Chris Rouse. There's something Rousian about the middle section, so I'm calling Maestro Mizuno the Japanese Rouse. So, but the same kind of experience, and he also, and I want to thank our friend who's been translating for him this week. So maybe just say a few words about your background.
I'm come from Japan, and I studied music when I was middle school, maybe 12 age or so. I began to study composition, and after high school, I entered the University of Law. I studied law, and after 4 years ago, after I'd like to study music and entered again Tokyo University of Arts of Music, and then I started to compose. I have various kind of composition, 5 symphony, 4 opera, and 3 musical, and many kind of string instrumental music, and chorus, and etc. The symphonic poem performed tonight is composed, I think I composed 22 years ago. 22 years ago. And, but I loved my piece, that piece. I'm very glad that and thankful to Marin select my composition, Natsu.
Thank you. It sounds good, doesn't it? I think it'll be great.
Yeah, it was a very nice performance. I'm very glad now. Thank you.
Good. Well, we're glad to have you. Thanks for being here. And Tina's piece is being played tomorrow afternoon, right? Is that?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I'm Tina Davidson, and I'm from the old school. I still use a pencil. I know this is unusual these days, but I love to write with pencil and to kind of feel the back of the music like it was Braille. I do a lot of work before I write the music. I draw, I read, I think, I walk. I do a lot of drawing. And in fact, I used to write my journals, and now I draw all my journals. And I'm always interested in, when I have an idea for a piece, to go immediately to the drawing and what that says to me. The piece that I've been working on most recently for orchestra is called Barefoot. And I was thinking about, I guess I get a lot of inspiration from just, I don't know, you know, the idea of walking and your bare feet going into dirt. It was winter, so I was cold. And so just the idea of, you know how it's so wonderful when you're in bare feet and you get your feet in the dirt. And also my pieces, it's very strange. I always think that I put myself into them and that I'm almost instructing the pieces, but what I find is the pieces instruct me. They tell me about myself. And one of the things that I continue to write more and more about, which surprises me, is my spiritual life. And so Barefoot was also, I was thinking of the burning bush and dancing barefoot before God. And so I created this piece that has a lot of energy and a lot of whirling, almost like whirling dervishes, where you whirl and you whirl and you whirl, and then you go up to God. So I don't know. I guess I also move a lot, so I get a lot of inspiration from when I move.
It sounds like it would be fun to watch everyone compose. So now's an opportunity to open it up we'll take questions now from the audience. Yes? Oh, and I think we have microphones, roaming microphones. Here, that's Eric roaming. Maybe could we have a little more light in the house too, just so we could see who's, that would be great. Just a little, yes?
So some of you, it sounds like, are rigorous instrumentalists, and some don't exactly have that. I'm real curious as a performer myself. Institutions like Eastman, if you audition as a graduate student for composition, you also have to audition on your instrument. And some of you that are in academia elsewhere, maybe that isn't a requirement, and I wondered as composition teachers how that works. As a performer, often I've found that the students of composition who don't have a tactile sense of an instrument don't write, at least they don't write very well for piano. For my instrument, they don't have a feel for the instrument, and then it's, anyway, I'm just curious on your take on this. It's relatively new in history, yes, that somebody is not a performer composer, so I wondered if someone could talk to that. Hope that's not too convoluted.
I think I understand the question about whether one needs to be an instrumentalist in order to be an effective composer. You know, it's the same question for a conductor, whether you need to be able to play every instrument to really articulate what you want. But I think there are very few composers that could play all the instruments that they write for. So you have to be able to, in my opinion anyway, as a conductor, you have to be a great character actor. You know, you have to be able to somehow inhabit the guise of different instruments. And for composers, I imagine it's a matter, I know Michael has people come and play and, you know, observe and what works and what doesn't work. When you're writing a concerto for an instrument, even if it's your own instrument, I imagine it would be helpful to get together with the person and figure out what you can do. But, I mean, I have to say that I find rigidity and rules about being artists antithetical to being an artist. And I was rejected from Juilliard because my piano skills weren't advanced enough, and I was told that I would never be a conductor because my muscles had atrophied for playing piano. I was 22 years old. So I sort of reject the idea. And of course now, all the conductors, there's a great school of conducting in Finland, actually great schools in Finland, and that's a whole other topic we could talk about. But they insist that every student be a string player. So that's the new rage. But so I just missed out. But do you want to talk to that about playing instruments and whether that you feel that's really critical to being a composer?
I mean, just in a nutshell, I feel like it's absolutely essential for me to have an instrument that I can do something with when I'm writing. But it is a little bit like a pet snake. I mean, you have to control. I mean, if you want to be you want to stay ahead of your tools, because any tool can start to use you as a tool. And with the piano, I mean, it's a wonderful instrument to compose on. It's certainly not the only instrument you can work with, but you can start to lose, for example, with the piano, the ability to think melodically, because it's not inherently a melodic instrument. There are all kinds of pitfalls with any tool, either instrument or computer. Some people use MIDI mock-ups to write things, and that's totally legitimate, but it can make pieces that don't have a lot of tempo changes and whatnot. So I think it's always just sort of being a little bit suspicious about what it is that you rely on. But I personally love having an instrument. I don't play it very well, but it's nice to have something to kind of release the music from.
Well, at Michigan, where I am, for undergraduate, you have to play an instrument to be admitted as a composer. For graduate studies, you don't. I think that's pretty common in many of the universities. Undergraduate, you usually have to play an instrument to be admitted, and graduate, you don't.
Is that because they need undergraduates in the orchestra? I mean, I'm trying to figure out what the motivation is.
Well, I think the motivation is that they want the students to be able to play an instrument, but to be admitted at master's, they're assuming that they can play an instrument. That they've gone through that study. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But it really helps, because to be a performer, because for many young composers, the way they make a living after they graduate is to play their instrument. So that's useful.
I've found too that students sometimes who don't play an instrument don't have a sense of what it takes to play an instrument, and so they're writing, and they don't have any sense of playing in an ensemble, what it takes to write something where people will have to play it together, particularly if there isn't a conductor, if it's like a chamber, like a string quartet or something. And also they don't have any sense of the limitations of the instrument. I mean, they can learn all that, of course, and if they get together with the instrumentalists, they can learn all that. But I think it's a big plus to be able to play an instrument. And for me, I know, I try some things at the piano, but I'm not a pianist, so I couldn't play it in time, or I don't try to play it in time at all. I just play individual chords and try things. But the way I was taught, and I find it works really well, is to sit down pretty often, almost every day, with the score and go through the score in time from the beginning, just to make sure the pacing is right. I can just go through it in my head. And it used to be that I always thought, gee, the beginning is so, when it was performed, the beginning's so slow, but the end is just right. And I realized it was because I was going through faster and faster at the beginning because I knew it so well. So then I sometimes use a metronome to make sure it's in time. But I don't know, that seems to work well for me.
I think there's two. One thing, of course, this pitfall with the piano is that everything sounds faster, and you realize when the orchestra starts playing, everything takes longer. The instruments take longer to unfold, and the sound, and my tempi are very often wrong. And I realize it at the rehearsal that my tempi are wrong, because I'm sitting in my room at home, with the piano. And the sound decays quicker or the opposite. It depends on what texture it is. But you can make some wrong decisions, and that's the wonderful thing in the rehearsal. That's what you try to repair. But then there is a practical, fantastic thing about the piano. It has a good music stand, which is, let's say you work on the violin, it doesn't have. So that's really helpful. And I'm so used to working like this, even if I have a table, I'm not as comfortable. I just can't, my posture is used to working with the pencil, well, actually pen, because pen slides much faster, and a paper that's sort of really smooth, So you get used to your tools, and it becomes almost superstitious to change them. So I hate using another pen, so it's the same pen for years.
Uh-oh, you could be in trouble.
I know.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's a little bit like being a chef who doesn't like to eat. And you probably would feel a little uncomfortable eating all their food. On the other hand, you don't want to have a chef that has to eat all the time. So it really, I do think that being able to play it gets you into into the depth of the sound. There is the surface pitch, but then there's the pitch that goes down. And I think that as a performer, you experience that in a physical kind of way, which you don't necessarily when you're just writing. So to me, there's a different connection.
Now let me see. It's hard to see. Questions? Yes, sir. I can't see who it is. Yeah.
It's been on my mind.
Well, there's a microphone right there for you.
Hello? Yeah, this is a question that's been on my mind for a long time. First of all, I really applaud the people here who work with the young composers, and I guess that's mainly Michael. Is that correct? You work with the young composers here?
Yes.
And the In the Works concerts, which I've been to as long as they've been here. But I wonder if there's any, and this is addressed to anybody here, if there's any kind of thing like that for people like myself. I've composed. I've entered composing very late in my life, and of course I'm beyond the age limit of people who could be in that group. And I was wondering if people would know about, I have a degree in music at a good university, and I've done some composing, but I could surely use the kind of coaching that these people benefit from.
It's an interesting idea. I have started a program in Baltimore called Rusty Musicians for people who didn't end up becoming musicians professionally, for non-professional musicians. And it's hugely successful. And as you can imagine, the first time we did it, we had 700 people show up. And now we've morphed it into a fantasy camp, which we just did for the second year. And the first year we had 50 people come for a week of intensive work with the professional musicians and me. And this year we had 100. So I'm wondering maybe we could expand it to composers to do like a week-long workshop with people who are non-professional composers but who would like to, work on their skills at writing for orchestra and have a master composer like Michael perhaps come and show the different techniques and what works and what doesn't work. That's a good idea. So I'll look to expand that, and you'll have to keep your eye on it. I think this is a rare program here for young composers, isn't it? Michael can probably speak to it more than I.
Yeah, it's rare because the pieces are not sight read; they're actually
performed.
Yeah, performed. Yeah.
And also having more than one conductor, I think, is a unique opportunity, not just for the conductors, obviously, but for the composer to understand that the life of their piece is really dependent upon the interpretive nuance of another individual. So I think all those elements are quite unique to this place. I'm not sure I could recreate that somewhere else. Oh, just start looking, start tracking me. You'll be all right. Just keep your eye, believe me. Or check out the Baltimore Symphony. We're doing a lot of programs like this, trying to reach out and connect with people on many different levels.
Marin,
yes?
Could I just add, I have for years taught in public schools as an artist in residence, helping underprivileged children in Philadelphia and also around Lancaster write their own music. And we start by building instruments, and we build them out of recycled materials, because when I was teaching, that was all that was there. So we build them out of cans and out of bottles. And I always say, you build an instrument with a kid, and you have to write music. And I'm one of those composers that believe that everybody should write music. Just the way, when you went into kindergarten, there was an easel and there was paints, and they said, here's a smuck, try not to get it on the floor. And then you painted, and it was yours. And I do believe that, I teach everyone. All my piano students have to write music. Everyone I come in contact, it's not even a requirement. It's just like breathing. And when you really want to, I really believe that it's about ownership of, you can see I'm very passionate about this, of music. But I am always amazed how well people write music who have no musical training. And I actually prefer teaching people who don't pretend or think, or who are already outside of a box. And a lot of my kids then go on because they're so impassioned. Then they have to learn the scales, and then they have to learn the theory. It's nothing. It's not a big deal because they already know the end that they want. So anyway.
And reading music, I mean, for those of you who read, reading music is quite simple. I mean, yes. It really, you could all learn to read music in 2 hours, no, without a doubt.
And if you can't, then you create your own notation system. So a lot of the kids, I just teach them, I said, write it yourself.
Right, figure out. Who is next? Yes?
I'm guessing that that can be helpful to composers. Could any of you talk about how you've used computer software and if it has not been helpful?
And the question is about computer software and how that has aided or not aided. I imagine Mason would say the same thing about it. Good things about it and bad things about it. So computers and anybody?
Well, I started with pencil and paper, still continue doing so. But about 7, 8 years ago, the software industry really developed into such a way that I'm concerned that the new generation would only compose at the computer, because it's so rewarding that you could have an instant playback. What you have written, whether piano or orchestra, it doesn't matter. You could have an instant playback, but the sound quality really doesn't match the acoustical sound. But for those who have ingrained the acoustical sound in their mind, they could imagine it, and that memory would not be corrupted by the instant playback of the computer. But those who start at the younger age and do not have that repository of the acoustical sound, then the imagination of orchestral timbre would be harmed. I think that's a drawback. But it's for someone who, at a more advanced age, would like to try it on composing, I think computer playback is really rewarding. Immediately you could hear your string quartet.
Yeah, there are two programs now that are very popular among composers. One is called Finale, and the other Sibelius. And it's been my experience, so whenever composers get together, you end up having a big argument about which one is better. I happen to use Finale, but
there you go. See?
But yeah, see, I use Finale, and I mean, you always know the things your program can do that the other one can't do. But so yeah, I'm sure we could argue for an hour here about which is better. But there are both programs. Behzad is right. You can, for a person who is just trying to do some composing as a hobby, it's not a bad idea. And there are easier programs too. I'm not sure what those are called. That isn't there one called Professional Composer or something? I'm not. That doesn't sound right. That couldn't be right. But that are easier to learn.
Logic and GarageBand.
Oh, GarageBand.
Oh, yeah.
GarageBand. Right. Well, it must make. I mean, what's interesting from my perspective is the copying of the music. Copying used to be such an onerous and huge expense. Where everything was hand copied. So just to copy an orchestral piece, even I'm thinking 20 years ago, could run you $5,000–$10,000 just for copying the music. So that was a huge impediment to having music performed, as you can imagine. Now, if you write it into the computer, it just spits out the parts. Those poor copyists, I don't know what they're up to, but. Also now, looking at music, I think our orchestras are much more accustomed to seeing the computerized parts. I'm accustomed now to seeing computerized scores too. But there are a few composers whose the handwriting, I can't live without their handwriting. It's interesting too, for me. But I don't know, that must be a great tool, though, to be able to print your parts. And I mean, also a burden because now you're expected to do it, I'm sure. Or just to have that accessibility. But these sound files they're horrible, aren't they? They have no nuance at all because they're computer driven. But at the same time, if you've never, I asked Zosha to run me off a MIDI of her piece, just so I get a sense of the architecture of it, which it doesn't sound so good on the computer, but you get a feel for the piece. So for me, it's very helpful.
It's amazing the difference.
That's an interesting point. That if you don't have to hand copy it all out, you might be more tempted to throw it out or redo it.
It's always hard to let go. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, there's photography that was once film. You take Ron, I'm sure Ron can talk about this, the photographer. It used to be you had to wait till you had the chemicals and went into the dark room. Now, you know, you can look on the viewfinder and see a thumbnail of what the picture is going to be. It certainly is not going to have the kind of image resolution. And, you know, it is easier to take 1 million photos and to throw them out. And it has probably changed the way that people approach the arts, the digital age. And I think it can democratize things and open up to a lot of people. Of course, for the folks in it, it can create other pitfalls that, you know, we just have to be aware of.
Yeah, but it brings up an interesting question, I think, don't you, about genuine talent, you know, and how to recognize that sometimes. I think that having this ability to, you know, write music, everyone, you end up, I think, a lot of times with, I hear a lot of music that's just written without genius behind it. You know, it's quite competent. And that worries me, too, that the tools start enabling people to, you know, almost anybody can build an orchestra on the computer, but, you know, to really write great music for an orchestra requires that X factor. See? Yeah,
I print everything out every day. I've found if on the few occasions when, you know, and I write in pencil, but I put things in the computer probably almost every day or every 2 or 3 days. Because, like, for an orchestra piece, I don't fill in all the parts. I know what I want to do, and it's hard to, you know, it takes time to pencil them all in. But I don't like to look at the computer or to write on the computer because it is so limiting. You know, when I first write notes, I don't put how long they're going to be, the durations. I just put note heads, and if you were going to do that on the computer, you have to make an instant decision about whether it's going to be a half note or a whole note or whatever, and you're kind of stuck in a certain meter too. But so I print out. I waste a lot of paper and ink actually because I print out every day, and when you're making a change, then, you know, I have version A, version B, version C. They're all on the computer in case I want to go back. But you can just, if you've left out you decide you want to eliminate 4 measures, you can just print out a version without those 4 measures in it, which is, you know, it's very convenient.
Pluses and minuses. Yeah, another question? Yes.
Well, I think I can speak loud enough. Yesterday, last night, the compositions, thank you, were wonderful. The orchestra was wonderful. But I was disappointed in one thing, and that was in us. The average age of the persons in the audience was probably 20 years higher than those of the composers, as an average, and definitely of the orchestra. What can you do as composers to bring a younger audience in? Is it going to take a Lady Gaga, a Common, a Trent Reznor writing a cello concerto to bring that audience in? How can you get a younger audience here to appreciate the wonderful works that you're doing and come to Cabrillo Music Festival or to almost any orchestra?
Well, that's an excellent question. It's really talking about the future of the classical music. Certainly, composers could do their share, but it's a collaborative effort. Start with the school level and also orchestras. We all have responsibility, but I just want to say one example that is close to me. My son is a composer as well. He just graduated from college. He's 22 years old. And from very young age, he was very fascinated by superheroes. And he wrote an orchestra piece with 2 singers, 2 baritones, one representing, I can't say that superhero because it's copyrighted, and then the second one, another superhero, very famous superheroes. And he had a residency with Peoria Symphony a few months ago, and both singers from Juilliard went with my son, to Peoria and had a whole week residency with school districts. They reached out about 3,500 people. The whole message was that resonated so deeply with the students was that we have to find our own superhero power. And the kids reacted to this message so well, something that I would not have been able to do. But having a young composer on the stage and interacting with the kids and trying to come up and finding out your own talent, it's a way to get excited students about music, about classical music, and supporting in the future. I think another example is what really happens in this festival, that really a people's festival. Everyone contributes, everyone collaborates to make this happen, and it's not an elitist festival. So I think it's happening, but it has to be in a larger scale.
Yes.
Comment is we have to bring our younger children with us, and I think tomorrow afternoon, you know, for that's gone a long way, having the free family concert to introduce people, and a lot of kids have grown up with the Cabrillo Music Festival. We have a wonderful student staff, and you know, these are young people who are members of this community, have grown up going to concerts here, and we'd love to expand that program more and reach more. You know, it's I think there are many levels to look at this, but look, I'm trying to attack both ends of the spectrum, at least to where I live most of the year in Baltimore. By I started an after-school program for underprivileged kids in West Baltimore, and we started with 30 kids, and in 3 years now we have 300 kids, and they're all playing instruments, sort of like the El Sistema model in Venezuela. I think you're probably all familiar with this. You've been reading about the El Sistema model. But it's interesting that that resonates so much here with us, that I think there is a desire to have art and music be part of kids' lives. I think that it's a problem with how we try to get it across. We're constantly trying to decide the methodology instead of just doing it. You know, I think that's one of the problems is always measuring in America. I feel like we're constantly measuring how well we do we set, and meanwhile we lose track of the fact that nobody's getting educated because we're busy measuring whether we're being educated. You know, well, that's my view anyway. And you know, in Venezuela, these kids, they don't really even have the right instruments. I mean, they're way too big for these little ones. You should see the kids on the huge tuba. I mean, they can't play it at all, but it's part of you're in the orchestra. You're automatically in the orchestra. So suddenly you belong, and you learn by osmosis from your peers. And, you know, there's a lot of talk in America about starting El Sistema-like programs, and they're starting, but, you know, I thought in Baltimore, well, let's just start and see what happens, you know. So already we're 3 years down the road, and we have second graders that going into third grade who are now teaching the little ones coming up. And I think we have to make this part of our value system. Look, I can go on and on and on. But if we also have, I mean, I feel, at least right now, that it would be great if the people at the top would once again say the arts are important, or more frequently, because I think that sets an example for everyone. I was just in Holland a few weeks ago, in Amsterdam, and you know, new government came in and cut the arts. They wanted to cut the arts entirely, but they cut them by 60%, and they're entirely government funded. You know, we always say, oh, it's so great in Europe. Not so great, you know, because they can be victimized like this too. So we have to have a revolution, I think, and everybody has to just start doing instead of talking. That's my thought about it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have something to say.
I do have something to say.
Sure I could feel the energy down the table.
You know, I think it's dangerous to ask composers, what are you going to do about it? Because I think what composers do so well is to reach deep into their hearts, and what does Shakespeare say? Heave their hearts into their mouths and speak their truth. And it would be, while I definitely write for my audience, you know, I don't say, oh, I'm just going to write whatever I want, and to hell with you, but I also want to keep true and clean to myself. On the other hand, going out and sharing the wealth, because it is such a wonderful wealth. It's such a gift to be able to do it and to participate in it. And I believe I was a composer in residence at one of these orchestras in Philadelphia. They did have ties to Argentina.
Yeah, I know the one that...
The Musicopia Orchestra, and I was there for 4 or 5 months. And I worked with the kids, and we built instruments, and they wrote music, and I wrote them music. And man, there is nothing so good. Oh, I know. I was writing Hilary Hahn, the violinist, a solo piece for her at the same time, and the paper brought somebody in and asked me, well, isn't it kind of, I mean, when you're writing these kids' music and you're writing Hilary Hahn music, I mean, and I knew what he wanted to say was like, isn't Hilary Hahn much more interesting? It is so cool to write for people that you see and that you can feel and you can touch. I mean, those kids, I just, you know, I was thinking when I was writing, oh, they are going to love this melody. They're just going to love it. And when I wrote Hilary Hahn, I'm like going, yeah, she's going to be able to play this. So one is never above the other. It is such a pleasure and such a joy. And to get them to write music and to help them, I used some of their melodies, and they created pieces. Man, they were on fire. I mean, but the organization, too, allows it. It has so many...
I think that's part of it, that for some reason, I don't know what happened, the symphony orchestra became this ivory tower, odd, inaccessible, very expensive, I mean, all those things, and very... sort of wealthy white people's art form, basically. And, you're not allowed to clap between movements, you have to dress, there are a lot of rules, all this kind of thing. And I think for those of us who are really opposed to that kind of elitism, I certainly am, I just think that everyone has to have access, free access to art and health care. So... in that order, I think what's really interesting. I think we're at a very exciting moment. I'm an eternal optimist, though, so take it with a grain of salt. I think that things are about to really sort of blow open in terms of the orchestra business, because we've pushed the envelope of extreme specialization, I think, to the maximum now. We have to now start diversifying what we do. We can't just play the notes on the page for those few people that want to hear the notes on the page. We have to now become institutions that belong to the society, that educate, that offer all kinds of different programs, not just one-dimensional. I mean, this is how I see the future, and I think if we don't, there probably won't be a big role for the symphonic organization in the future, to be honest. The Cabrillo Festival is great. I mean, we've been doing for, certainly since Ellen and Tom and I have been here, I mean, our goal has always been just to open up the creative process to as much inclusion as possible. And the other day, I have to say, when I was looking around the room, and here anyway, there were 400 people came to one of the rehearsals, and they're milling around, and I had 20 young conductors and the composers, and I looked at the orchestra, and they're all, for me, that was real happening, excitement and young people, but intergenerational. I don't want to say we just have to get the young people into one of the problems. Look, I could go on for hours, so I won't. But I think if we all just say this is something we put high on our value list, then we can change it pretty quickly, because I think the climate is right for that. But should we do one more question before we close? Oh, okay, I can't really even see where.
There.
Okay, somebody's really If you're
Yes.
crazy, then I'll notice you.
Thank you. You have been talking about likening composing music to going through a pregnancy. And I have two quick questions related to that. One is, if you were doing a tone poem and you're wondering about a part of it with cello against bassoon, Do you ever call in a couple of cellists and a bassoonist and have them play it and then perhaps say, oh, we need more bassoons? But then the second question is, after the baby's born, i.e. after the performance, do you ever consider plastic surgery? Might you go home and say, you know, I really need to get a couple more bassoons in that part?
Well,
yeah, go ahead, since you're the baby
yeah,
expert.
That happens often. That's a great thing about art. I mean, with child, you can't really do much about it, right? But with music, you have that opportunity, second chance, and the third chance to adjust. Sometimes you adjust the dynamics, sometimes you adjust the instrumentation, and sometimes it takes 10, 15 years of work in progress, and I think our generation is not the first one. It's well known that Brahms spent many, many years on his first symphony, and Bruckner constantly changing, yes, Beethoven.
Beethoven's notebooks.
So it's a work in progress. When the piece is published, that's the final moment you say, I can't really do much about it. But I think you get encouragement, you get comments from your colleagues. For example, I wrote this piano concerto that Jean-Yves Thibaudet is playing tonight. And he has suggestions here and there for the solo part. And I trust his expertise on the instrument. He knows by far better than I do. And so that's the give and take. And I think that's a thrill of working with a composer and also working with a performer, that we all into this process. But ultimately is the audience that they could come to you and they have suggestions as well. It's again, is not elitist, as Marin was saying, that music should be relevant, composers should be relevant to the society, and that's part of the give and take process.
There is such a thing as a dramaturgy of a piece, and sometimes you think you didn't answer something you set up at the beginning of the piece. For example, the piece tonight, when I wrote it first, the last movement was just strings. So I completely left out the rest of the orchestra, and then I looked at it again, thank God, before the premiere, and I've added some instruments, but not the whole orchestra. And after the first performance, I said, that's not good enough. I added some instruments. Then it had another performance, still was not enough. So just before this performance, I've added the whole orchestra. And I'm much happier now, but it takes a few rounds. And you just make decisions which you don't know for sure, are they going to work? And it's a little bit, I have this sort of slightly grieving process when you give up the piece, when you sort of say that's it, and the copyists tell you that's it, you can't change a thing, we've extracted the parts, no more changes. They really hate changes at some point. And so you feel, oh my God, I have no more control. So that's kind of scary. So the feeling that you can change a piece and you can develop it from performance to performance is actually a wonderful privilege to be able to work with.
I'm looking at Michael because he's changing his piece up until the last second always, aren't you? You seem calm this week. Is it because we haven't entered into your week yet? That's what it is. But we've done recordings. You were changing the music at the recording, weren't you? Oh no,
a little bit. I think.
A little bit, yeah.
But I say if you're not taking risks, then you know. So every piece I write, I try to do something a bit different. So there you go.
Yes.
You've alluded to this a little bit, but after the important challenge that you managed to scale...
Yeah, okay, here it is. Here's the mic.
Thanks. After the important challenge that you've managed to scale somehow of getting a first performance for your work, what about second performances and repeat performances and what they can teach you and what they can do for your career? How difficult is that? It seems frequently almost impossible. A work gets a premiere and then one never hears from it again.
Who wants to speak to that?
Well, that's why we have Marin always plays.
You know, one of the challenges is that it's hard to distribute recordings of orchestral music. That's a challenge. That's something that I hope that can be resolved. It's places like the Cabrillo Festival make it a lot easier to get the word out, because you have this wonderful, I mean, I would say the best new music orchestra in the country. Mm-hmm. And you have how many pieces per week that are new, that are played. I think it's critical, more important really than a flashy premiere is that fifth performance in a small town somewhere. That's more important to me than anything. The pieces really have to live on. And it takes some real effort to make the pieces known to conductors. They're often always busy. And we're just very lucky that there are people like Marin who will take a festival like this and will do my piece, for example, which had its premiere a year and a half ago, and she wanted to do it, I presume, because she liked the piece. That's fantastic. A lot of times folks want that first premiere because it's so flashy, but I mean, it's festivals like this that really make those, the pieces have lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else? You know, and I think I was alluding a little bit to the changing times. I think, you know, something that it's a struggle right now that we're trying to grapple with. I'm a member of the AFFM, which is the musicians union also. But you know, the rules are so prohibitive about disseminating the performances, and with good reason. I mean, that came about for a good reason originally. But I think today it's probably not the same reason. And it would be great if we can move toward a much more flexible digital dissemination, because I would like to see everything we do online. But you know, that's a challenge. Maybe eventually we'll get to that. You know, the musicians already are they have to stand strong to come here. You know, because it's not really considered, how can I put this? It's not really kosher, you know, because they're donating their services to be here. So, you know, we're trying to balance everything as well as we possibly can. So, but I think in the future you're going to see a lot more ability to offer things online and be able to get that direct. That's what I feel is going to happen. That's why I'm excited about the future. Also, when you see young artists, it's a thrill to see the young artists who, you know, they don't even have these barriers between the different art forms. You know, I find that I see visual artists who are writing music. I see musicians who are visual artists. You know, there's a new movement going on that's extremely exciting, and it's sort of a blending of all the art forms that I think will herald a new age of exciting creativity for everybody. But on that creative, happy note, thank you all very much. Thank all my composers. Look at them all. Wow. And thank you all for being here.